And then when it tones down a little bit and you're adjusting, the grief isn't getting any less. You're just handling it different. You lose them all over again when maybe you're experiencing something they would have loved. And then you get that realization, wow, it's been X amount of time and they're not here.
Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm really, excited to have this conversation with you. And so I appreciate you inviting me on.
Of course. I feel like these are conversations that are needed to be had.
Yeah, I definitely agree for the fact that when you are presented with grief, I felt kind of alone, even though it's something that everybody in life is going to experience at some time. But yet I felt kind of alone in it because maybe it's not talked about enough. So you kind of just have this sense of, I'm going through something terrible and I don't want to bring everybody else down. And what am I supposed to do with this? Like, life has changed so much. What do you do from here? I've always been a person who likes to talk about things, even when it's hard. It's just therapeutic and makes me feel better. And sometimes you start to realize like, oh, this person can relate. And then you're like, wow, I don't feel alone in this very human experience that, many people have gone through or will go through it one day.
Exactly. I feel the exact same way. So yeah, we're the
That's
same
right.
there.
Yeah.
So let's dive in. You lost your brother and your father 56 days apart.
Yes, in 2021. My brother was in a car crash on March 28th. He was coming back from work. Him and his coworker were maybe 1.5 miles from their shop, and they're just driving down this quiet road, but it is a bit bendy. There was somebody who was racing on the opposite side of the street and lost control and hit my brother's truck head on. And my brother was actually not the one driving, but he was the one that was impacted the most. He passed away that night, and I didn't get a phone call until the next day, like 3:00 in the morning, maybe. I had a newborn. My schedule was all crazy, and I saw my phone ringing, and it was on silent. And when you have it on silent, if someone rings twice, it will go through. And I saw it was my cousin, and I was like, oh, this is so weird that he's calling me right now. But I didn't think much about it. It's like, maybe he needs help. And he called me, and he was just like, hey, Jen, I've got some really bad news for you. I was like, what happened? And he was like, Jack's been in an accident. And so I was like, oh my God, just tell me where he's at. Like, I'll go there. He just started breaking down crying. And I was like, what's wrong? And he was like, I'm so sorry, but he's passed. And I was just in utter shock. I'm like, what do you mean? And all he could say was like, I'm so sorry. And he's like, but I'm going to have to call you back. And I remember pacing around my house thinking, this can't be true. This is 3:00 in the morning. What is going on? Like, no. And I remember just pacing around, and my partner had come up to me and he was like, what's wrong? Because then you started hearing me crying. And I was like, Jack is dead. Jack is dead. And he was like, no. You just had a bad dream. It's okay. Just sit down. Because I'm a very active dreamer. And he was like, it was just a nightmare. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, he's dead. He was just like, there's no way. And we're crying. And I'm sitting there. And all I can think about is I have to go downstairs and tell our dad that his only son has passed away. Our dad had been dealing with congestive heart failure for many years. It goes in stages, and he was in late stage heart failure. But I don't think a lot of people knew how bad it was because My dad was a very determined person who wouldn't let much stop him. So he was going bowling on Friday, even though it was like really rough for him, because my dad was a very stubborn man. He's like, I'm going to live life the way I want it. So I knew how bad he was, and maybe some family, because I went to his doctor's appointments, and that's why he lived with me. I convinced him to move in with me so he could just be close. I could help take care of him with things he needed. I was convinced that I was going to lose him immediately. I went downstairs and delivered the news, and will never forget the just agony that I heard come from my father. And I felt so bad that I had to be the one to literally break his heart. Everything else is just this chaotic blur. It was just a whirlwind of figuring out exactly what happened, what to do. I was always the one he would call when he needed to get out of the jam. I'd come over and clean his place for him, things like that. We had a 8-year age difference. So he was like my first baby. Mm-hmm. And then as he got older, I was the cool older sister / mom type, where I was the buffer between our parents. And then in adulthood, he was just like a cool friend, but I still always took care of him. So I just went into this mode of, I've got to go find all his things, and I need to bring them to us. So that day I went to his townhouse that he just moved in with these new roommates, packed up all his stuff. I was just in this mode where I was like, I don't want anybody to just touch his stuff, get rid of it. I don't know the people he moved in with. I went over to the hospital to get my brother's stuff because I did not want our parents to have to do that. That was probably one of the hardest things ever, is going to a hospital and they just give you this like white bag of all their belongings. And I was just in this mode of keeping myself busy, and I felt like I was in a dream, in autopilot, and I somehow just knew where to go. And in that moment, I stopped and they handed it to me, and I just bawled in the hospital. People were coming up to me. They're like, are you okay? Are you okay? And I remember this police officer standing there, and he was like, she just lost somebody. And I couldn't bring myself to open the bag because it just felt like that was the first step of, are you sure he's not coming home? After that day and we got home, I didn't know what to think. There was a news article about it. I almost had this way of punishing myself. I want to know everything. But with that comes a lot of pain, but also not knowing things. I have a great big imagination. I rather know the facts than, my mind make up what I think happened. And it just was surreal. I look at this news article, I see the crash, and my heart just like broke that my brother had to be subjected to somebody's poor decision. And that goes into a whole mess of other feelings that you get with grief. So we kind of went through the days just figuring out arrangements, getting family together, trying to make sure his 2 kids, his son Lincoln and his daughter Luna, were as okay as they could be. And at the same time, I was just hyper vigilant on how my dad was doing. Like, Dad, you okay? You okay? You okay? And I knew he wasn't okay. He had lost his brother many years ago when I was about 13, which was the age of my son when my brother died. My uncle had died in a car crash pretty much the same way. He was in a work truck on his way home, and a person was going too fast and hit him head on. So it was just very eerily similar. And I felt more for my dad than for myself, being that that's his son, but that he's lost two people close to him in the same exact manner. So I was like, Dad, what can I do for you? How can I make this as easy as possible? So I kind of took over setting up arrangements and how it would look, of course, with our parents' approval, but just kind of taking the lead. And I dove into that to distract myself from what was really going on. After funeral and things settled down a little bit is when I could see how much pain my dad was in, both physically and mentally. My dad was a very strong man. When we were little, it was almost like the dad that you were afraid of. Like, you loved him so much and they would never harm you or do anything of that nature, but had that toughness to him. Never cried. The only time I ever saw my dad cry is when his brother died. And to see him just weep and just call out my brother's name every day, I just knew this isn't going to end well. There's no way that he's going to pull through for as long as he should have.
Do you think your brother passing fast-tracked his...
100%. He was given a year prior, my dad was given a diagnosis of, hey, you have been managing congestive heart failure for over 10 years. And the last few years was where it became more advanced and he was on medication. There comes a point where medication only works for so long until your body just doesn't respond to it the way it's supposed to. He had pretty much run out of options medication-wise. I remember taking my dad to that appointment and waiting outside, and he was like, honey, I have bad news. They tell me I only have a year left. He said, but doctors don't know anything and they don't know me. So it's going to be longer than a year. And my dad was very strong-willed. I very much believed that because he had survived so many things already that probably should have killed him. But his will to be here for us kids, to see us through into adulthood a little more, especially my brother. He always wanted to make sure he was on the right track. So I knew he would be fine, but I remember crying in that moment, thinking about, wow, one day my dad is probably going to pass sooner than he should. And never thought about it again until the day my brother died. I was just thinking, I don't know how he's going to be able to handle this. So when he made it through the first night, and then the first week, and then the second week, I was like, okay, he's going strong. And this is amazing because my dad only had 12% function of his heart. As the days went on and it sets in, when every day you wake up and you realize they're not coming back, it weighed so heavy on him that come May, he was just in really bad shape. His breathing was terrible. He started retaining a lot of water. He just wasn't doing well. And I was like, we need to take you to the hospital. He didn't want to be in the hospital, but I was like, they can do something. And when he went, it was, sir, you need to have some sort of life-saving type procedure done. He could have gotten an LVAD, and I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but it is a battery-operated device that's essentially attached to your left ventricle of your heart. That's like the pumping part of your heart, the most important one, and that was the part of his heart that was damaged the most. They said, you either have to get this or we have to send you home because there's nothing we can do for you. My dad never wanted that assisted device because he thought it was just going to hold him back more. A lot of people that get it, it's to wait for a heart transplant. And my dad was no longer able to get a heart transplant just with other health issues he was having. So he, against medical advice, which is so on par for him, was like, Doc, I'm leaving this hospital. And I sat with my dad all night because they called me and they were like, he is doing terribly. There were still COVID restrictions in the beginning of 2021. And I got myself in there and stayed with him all night. And the next morning he was like, see, I'm here. I'm getting out of here. And he pleaded with him. He was like, please don't leave this hospital. And he said, Doc, I have went through the most terrible thing any person can go through as a parent. If you're telling me I'm dying, I'm not doing it in this hospital. I'm going to go be with my family and be where I want to be. The doctor just looked at him and he was like, I can't tell you what to do. He was like, even better yet, Doc, I'm supposed to actually be leaving for Vegas in 2 days to go meet with 2 of my brothers. There's a bowling tournament there. I am determined to go on that flight. Vegas was a bucket list trip of mine. And he said, sir, don't do that. He's like, you're not going to even make it to the airport. And my dad was like, well, when I make it to that airport and I get to Vegas and when I come back, we'll talk about that LVAD. And he said, okay. And as we were rolling him out of the hospital, the doctor pulled me aside and he said, I cannot say this in front of staff because I have to maintain a reputation. But he was like, your dad has some balls. He's like, I admire that because he's doing what he wants to do. And we left. My dad got some sleep. He probably lied to his brothers a little bit, saying, oh yeah, I'm good. Like, I'm out of the hospital. I'm feeling great. And they said, okay, we'll meet you in Vegas. It was probably 2 days after the hospital. We were getting him ready. I was packing his clothes for him. I was like, we've got to get you some nice, like, Vegas clothes, trying to keep it light because it was something he was looking forward to. He was like, yeah, honey. He was like, that would be good. But I just wanted to let you know when I'm gone, he was like, you can donate all my clothes. I was like, Dad, you don't need to be talking like that. Like, everything's good. He was like, and whatever you want to do with my stuff, you can just do as you please. And I was like, yeah, that's cool, Dad. But, you know, you're just going on to Vegas. It's just a 3-day trip. And I was like, and if you feel bad, we'll get you a flight back home early. And he said, okay. We talked a bit about our grief, which we had talked about many times with trying to handle it, because I would often ask him, how did you deal with the grief of your brother? But then at the same time, I told him, I feel terrible for asking you this because this brother that I'm grieving is your son. And you're sitting here trying to give me advice when you just lost something so important to you. You know, I kind of compare it in the moment. But my dad was so understanding and was like, he was your brother and your grief is my grief. So he's like, don't ever feel bad for speaking about your grief to me. The next day, we got up bright and early. I drove him to the airport and I told him, I was like, Dad, when you get to your layover, you're going to call me. I was like, when you get to the hotel, you're going to call me. And he's like, okay, Mom. And I was like, don't ever not call me. Just keep checking in. You know, if you feel bad, anything wrong, let me know. He said, okay. I had written him a letter that I emailed him so he could have on his phone. And I was like, and Dad, whatever you do, make sure you read this letter on the plane. I had this overwhelming sense to just write him a letter just to tell him how much I appreciated him as my father, and that although nobody is a perfect parent, that he was perfect for me. I talked about some memories that we had and how I was going to respect any decision that he made because it's his life, his body. And I didn't want him to ever feel pressured by me to do things that maybe he wouldn't want to have done. And that's why, against probably anybody's judgment, like their good judgment, I was like, well, let's let him go to Vegas. And he flew to Vegas and he read the letter and said he cried like a little baby on the plane. And he spent a whole day and a half with his brothers, gambling, just hanging out. And I never saw him again until his body got sent to us maybe 11 or 12 days after he had passed. And I knew that something was getting bad for him because he did call me and was telling me, I don't feel too well. I'm kind of freaking out. Anxiety in congestive heart failure patients is actually a side effect at the end because you start to get this buildup of fluid. So you feel like you can't breathe and it causes anxiety attacks. But in a healthy person, you just know that you need to regulate your breathing. When you've got fluid filling up, there's nothing you can do. And his medicine wasn't working. So I was like, Dad, let me get you home early. No, I can't leave my brother Matt. We're supposed to fly out on the same day because his other brother was going to fly out the day before. And I was like, please let me book you this flight. And finally he said, fine. I was like, you've got like 6 hours until you get a flight. You'll come back home and we'll do whatever we need to do to make you comfortable. But it went downhill from after that. The last phone call I had with him, he called and he was kind of freaking out a little bit of panic. I could hear the worry in his voice. I just told him, I was like, Dad, let's just breathe together. So we were breathing in and out. I could hear my uncles in the background. And then he went to sleep. And so my uncles were like, okay, you calmed him down. He was able to get some sleep because he wasn't sleeping well. And then I had gotten a call maybe an hour or so later where my uncles were like, your dad just was trying to get up and he fell over. They rushed him to the hospital, but we don't think it's looking good. Somewhere in my mind, I was like, my dad has gotten through anything. They'll get him well enough to get us back together. But that just is not what happened. My heart broke all over again. Even though I knew that it was coming, I don't care what anybody says, how much you prepare mentally. When it actually happens, it's like everything that I tried to prepare myself for, it just went straight out the window.
Did you realize or find that you had like an anticipatory grief around your father before he passed?
Yeah, because the days that I would spend with him, I tried to make more intentional because it was like there was a clock telling me like, hey, you didn't even think he was going to make it past the first day of Jack's death. And here we are a month and a half in. We're just riding it for as long as I could. But I was still very well aware that it wasn't looking good. And then still trying to process every day. My brother is gone. And then I'm trying to keep our dad alive for as long as I can, but also felt extremely guilty for that because he was in so much pain where I felt how selfish of me to want to prolong my father's life when he's in so much agony. And it's not that my dad didn't want to be here, but he told me, I know you'll be okay, Jen. I never worried about you as much as I did your little brother. Because ever since he was little, he was always getting into something or hurting himself. He was a mischievous little thing. He said how incredibly guilty he felt that his son passed before him because he said, I'm the sick one. I'm the one that should have died X amount of times. Why him? So he was there suffering. And there were times where he was just in a place where it's like he was half here and half just wanting to be with my brother. And he told me, he was like, wherever we go, it can't be that bad because your brother is there. He just longed to be with him again. Then he would have some days where he would tell me, Jen, I really want to push through. I want to be here for my grandbabies. I just want to live more life. And that's really hard to process when people want to live and they want to be here, but their bodies just aren't working the way that they should. But then also being torn where I just kind of want to throw in the towel, like I miss my son type of situation. There were just all sorts of grief going on, and throw some anger in there too. I was just kind of all over the place.
Whenever your dad passed, was there a difference between both griefs you were experiencing since they were so close together, or did they almost become like intertwined?
It was so weird thinking back to when my dad passed in that limbo period. Since he was out of state, I didn't know that it takes as long as it does for them to do whatever process and schedule a flight out and stuff like that. So it was still a thing where it felt very surreal, where I just still felt like my dad was in Vegas. I'm just like, he's in Vegas and I'm just not talking to him. I want my brother so I can have somebody who understands the pain of losing our parent. But once he came back and I saw him, it was very much real. It consumed me. And then as soon as the funeral and everything was done, it switched back. It wasn't always linear. It was almost depending on what was happening. It was a situation where I felt like my brain could only process so much. And then it got to a point where I still struggle to this day to accept my brother's death, because he was young, healthy, vibrant. As a coping mechanism, my brain kind of made this place of where, oh, he's just out in the world and too busy to talk to his older sister. He's just living his life, doing whatever. Maybe I'll see him again. Whereas my dad, it's the natural order of things. And I saw that he was sick and not doing well. So I accepted it, but it doesn't make it any easier. And to this day, I have moments where some days I grieve heavier for my father, or some days I grieve heavier for my brother, or it's just both of them. I don't know who said it, but it was along the lines of, you don't lose your loved one once, you continue to lose them. And in the beginning, it feels like every day you wake up and you're saying, wow, this is my reality. They're not coming back. And then when it tones down a little bit and you're adjusting, the grief isn't getting any less. You're just handling it different. You lose them all over again when maybe you're experiencing something they would have loved. And then you get that realization, wow, it's been X amount of time and they're not here. And it's just heartbreaking all over again.
Where your grief was to where you are now with it, how has it evolved? And are there any pivotal moments in your healing process?
I sometimes offer myself zero grace, where there will be times I still feel like I'm in the thick of it, where it's just in my body. Like, I know when that happened, essentially when my brother died is when it all started. It changed me in ways that is sometimes hard to explain. It has evolved in a way where I am more of a functioning person, where I'm not crying every day. You know, in that first few months, it's just like a fog. You feel like you can't do anything. I was mad that the world kept spinning, even though I have these kids and, you know, you want everybody to live their life to the fullest. It's like, how dare when you lose someone you love that you don't just get a pause, just like a break. Pause, everybody pause. Let me gather myself. Let's just realize that somebody so important to somebody was lost. But no, it keeps going. I was trying to keep up with that along with my family and my mental health. I felt like sometimes I was drowning in it. And so now, even years later, I'm at a point where I'm truly taking the time to do the healing that I need to do through therapy and different like emotional release type things, because I just have everything just stored up. I've always been labeled strong. You're so strong, you're so resilient, and all of these other things, which are great qualities and aspects. You kind of get tired of being strong. It's like, You know, that's why people, when they work out in the gym, they may be really strong, but they need a break too. And it's like constantly carrying around this weight. And it's like, I don't want to be strong. I just want to be and figure this all out. So I can't stress enough how giving yourself grace and accepting the fact that it's okay to need help in whatever way that may look for you, that you ask for it or you take it. I tend to never ask for help. And when it's offered, I'm like, no, I can do it. But it's like, no, don't do that to yourself. Like, give yourself a break. I hate to use PTSD because I don't know too much about it, but it feels like it could be something that is true in grief.
I feel like losing someone unexpectedly or anyway, it's a trauma. Like, it is a trauma, you know. I 100% believe and feel the PTSD aspect you're saying. I believe it is a form of that. What is the biggest surprise or experience you have had with your grief that you didn't expect?
I would have to say that eventually, when you can take it all in and move past the sadness a little bit, the gratitude that I've been able to find, thinking less of the tragic aspects of it all. I had such great relationships with both of them. We were all so close with each other. Having that clarity to start to remember the good memories, because in the beginning, it felt like all the things I could think about were the guilt, the tragedy behind it, where it starts to make you feel like you can't remember the good stuff. I would start to worry, oh, am I going to forget what they look like or the sound of their voice? Yes, you have pictures and stuff, but there's something different about being able to visualize them when you close your eyes. And I worried about that a lot. Now in my sadness, I try to think about all the beautiful moments that we had and just how much we loved each other. And that's why it hurts so much, because something I had said at my brother's funeral, grief is just love with nowhere to go. It doesn't ever stop because they're gone. It just like builds up and you no longer have that person to express it to. So I have also tried to be very mindful in having gratitude in the most minor moments. This is the human experience, and we don't know. This could be our last conversation ever. And how beautiful is it that we are alive at the same time to know each other and be happy or sad and express all these beautiful emotions and not get hard on myself for things or stress over the stuff that really doesn't matter, because we're not getting out of here alive. So to just take in the smallest of things, you know, it snowed the other day, and it's just having the ability to just look out and be like, wow, it's snowing. I've seen it snow hundreds and hundreds of times, but this is so beautiful. Like, this could be my last snowfall. Let's try to take it all in. I'm still working on it. It can be very hard at times, but when I get overwhelmed, that's what I reflect back on. Also, making sure to check in with the people that I love. And even if it's the smallest of things, just making sure to get that extra hug in before they leave. Because that's one thing I had so much guilt about, is the last time I actually saw my brother, he was in my driveway and he was dropping our dad off. This was a week before he had passed. And I saw him, I heard his music, and I looked out the window, but I didn't say anything. I was just like, oh, and he went off, and I just tell myself, damn, I should have just run out there and given him that hug or said something, even if he was like, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? You know, just to let yourself be more vulnerable and not think you're being extra or like someone's going to think that's weird. You know, just with my kids, I love you so much. You just give them a hug and not be like, Mom, are you okay? Is something wrong? You know, just really just grasping the moments and just understanding that this is what's most important. these moments that we have. I didn't think I would ever be able to really see that, because it also made me feel guilty.
Right. But I do think that's a huge step that happens eventually.
It needs to happen. I feel like with some people, especially myself, it's almost like I had to punish myself anytime I felt a moment of happiness or gratitude or was laughing or anything, because I was stuck in a mode where I need to be sad all the time because they're not here. And I am sad all the time, but I can also be these other things. And we still need to experience our lives as well.
What is the best advice you would give someone that is early in their grief journey?
Feel the feelings. I know that the more you resist it, the more it persists. Like, those feelings want to be felt. Sometimes if you're not feeling them the way you feel like you should be, somebody's like, well, they seem okay. They're not crying right now, or they're able to eat or go to a restaurant. Don't feel bad about that. You have to be able to take care of yourself and understand that everybody grieves differently, and to ask for help or accept help when people are trying to give it to you. Because I understand, even after having such immense loss, when I've had people I know lose somebody, I still find it kind of hard to not sound cliche, like, oh, it will get better, or, I know now all the things not to say because I didn't want them said to me, or when they were said to me, I was like, oh, this is not helping. But to just express what you need if you can,
Yeah.
And don't feel bad if you don't want to be around people, because that can be exhausting. Less worry about everybody else and just really just focus on what feels right for you, and your people will understand, and they will be there once you get over that initial hump.
What advice would you give Jennifer early in her grief?
Man, to not beat yourself up with so much guilt and the what ifs. I feel everybody, when someone's passed, you have reflected and said, oh, I wish I didn't do this, or I wish I said this to them, or I wish I wasn't so mean to them that one time, especially with my brother, because for brother and sister, you have those times where I'm like, oh, you are so annoying. And I felt guilty for any bad emotion I ever felt, or any time we had little disagreements. It made me feel bad. Now I look back and I'm like, but that's life. We have all these emotions and different things, and that's the dynamics of brothers and sisters, and we loved each other so much. And to just not feel all the guilt and lean more into all the happy times that you had. If you ever felt that you wished you showed more love, or you did things a little bit more different, to just take that and apply it to your everyday life currently. That comes in with being more intentional. Say all the things. Don't worry about what are they going to think, or I'm going to burden them, or, whatever. Just say how you feel, because if you don't get it out, it's just going to be in there, and then you're going to wish one day that you said it. I just feel like being more authentic, you can't really go wrong with that. And that is why it has made it easier for me to be less guilty, because when I was with my brother and our dynamic, we were always authentic. So how can I be guilty about that? The grief-stricken mind has a way of just honing in on that in the beginning. Oh, was I a good enough daughter? Or maybe I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that. It's just not going to get you anywhere but feeling just like a basket case. So I feel ultimately that would be my best advice, and not try to run through it or feel guilty about talking about your people. Because that's one thing I feel sometimes when I post on Instagram or anything about my brother and my dad is people thinking, oh, here's that sad girl coming, just bringing it down. But it's like, it's life. It's not all fun and cheery, and talking about people, talk about your people. I want everybody out there to know that is one thing I personally find helps is don't be afraid to talk about the people or ask questions about the people that your friends or loved ones lost, because it closes you in and you feel like just because they're gone, you can't talk about them anymore. And being able to talk about that, I love when people ask me about my brother or my dad or bring up a memory or a story. And I know a lot of people hold back on that because they don't want to bring up anything bad or, make you feel upset. And it's like, no, please. I want to talk about them because it keeps them alive. And it makes me feel like they're a part of my everyday.
I love that. Do you have any final words you would like to share?
I just am really grateful for this experience that you have given me, because facing it head on in a space like this can bring up all the emotions, but it just reaffirms that I can do hard things. And to some, this may not feel hard, like, oh, you're on a podcast, talking about people you loved, but it really brings on such strong emotions that I sometimes try to push aside. And so I feel like this is helping me along in my journey. And I really appreciate this space that you have provided people out of your own loss. It's something I find to be quite beautiful. You took something terrible and have made it into this therapeutic space that can hopefully reach a bunch of people, and people can realize they're not alone. There's always someone who can have some understanding and you don't, feel alone. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I do. I want it to help people. So,
and hopefully it helps you too along the way.
Yes. But yeah, that's like a byproduct. I want people to not feel so alone in their journeys.
I appreciate it so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And I appreciate you, Jennifer. Thank you so, so much for sharing today and being here.
Anytime.
Thank you so much for watching Lost and Found. I really hope that this episode resonated with you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe below. There will be new episodes every Friday, and grief is hard, and you don't have to do it alone. And I love you, and I hope I see you next time.